So we're going to graph the tangent and cotangent functions with transformations, and we need to be able to do that. So here I have a tangent graph, and first of all I'm going to figure out the period. The period for tangent x is pi, and so the period for the one that I have is pi divided by what's sitting out in front of the x. So the period is going to be pi over 2. Now I want to just remind you of a tangent graph with no phase shift, and I'm not going to worry about the reflection just yet, so we can just visualize what tangent's going to do, and then we'll apply the other two things. So we know that tangent at 0 is 0. If the period is pi halves, then it's symmetric about 0, and there's an asymptote half of a period to the right and half of a period to the left, so that the asymptotes end up being pi halves apart. So what that means is there's an asymptote here at pi over 4, and there's one here at negative pi over 4. So I can make those asymptotes. And if I'm just graphing tangent x graph, then it goes basically like this, and halfway over here is at 1. Halfway this way is down here at 1. Now that would repeat itself then every pi halves. Now looking at this one to say what do I have different, first of all I have the negative on the front, which is going to be reflected over the x-axis, and so instead of going the way it's going, this piece would go down here and this piece would go up here. And then of course it repeats itself. Well, the other thing going on here is a phase shift, so we would take what's sitting in the parentheses and put it equal to 0 and solve it for x, and so we can move the 3 pi to the other side and then divide both sides by 2, and so this is shifted to the right by 3 pi halves. Now let's just look at the graph of this for just a minute so that we can see sort of what happens with that phase shift. So first of all, I'm going to draw several periods of this without the phase shift. And so if I make this first tick mark at pi over 4, then the next place that there's going to be an asymptote is pi over 2 after that, which is 3 pi over 4. Then there's going to be another one at 5 pi over 4, another one at 7 pi over 4. Back this way there was one at negative pi over 4. So these are where all of the vertical asymptotes would be if there was no phase shift. So I'm going to put those in. And then we know the tangent graph would cross in the middle, and it was reflected, so it would go this other way. And I'm going to put several cycles of this in. They're cycles, they're not really cycles, several periods here. So the repeats looks like this. Now, that's what it would look like without the phase shift. I'm supposed to move everything to the right by 3 pi halves. Let's take this asymptote that's at negative pi fourths. There's 1 pi half, 2 pi halves, 3 pi halves, so it would land on the 5 pi fourths. If we start with the asymptote here at pi fourths, 1 pi half, 2 pi half, 3 pi halves, it would land right here on 7 pi fourths. Well, if the asymptotes just slid over to land on other asymptotes, then the functions between them would just slide over and land on other parts of the function where they just match up perfectly. So you're not going to really see the phase shift here. Even though I moved everything to the right by 3 pi halves, it landed on something that was already in that same spot. So it looks just like without the phase shift, essentially. So this is the graph of negative tangent of the quantity 2x minus 3 pi.